Sorry to interrupt.
That is, yes, thank you. Always good to remember that. Great. So maybe I'll share the agenda on my screen just as a reminder what we're trying to do today. Give me 1 second and I'll get that up. So today's meeting is one of the last that you have as a subcommittee before you're delivering up your pathway strategies and actions, and in particular, your priority actions to the council. Council meets on Monday, the 16th to review what you do and what the other two subcommittees are doing, the substantive writing subcommittees. So we're getting to that sort of final hurrah of all the thoughtful work you've been doing. In the agenda, we put a little bit more detail about what we mean by priority actions. And we're going to be spending some time on this today. The council this time around, unlike last time around, is very focused on being able to, within the full suite of pathways, strategies, and actions, lift up towards the top of the document some of those actions and really call attention to the legislature and the administration on those actions and make that a manageable number and really focus those on things that are going to be the most important things over the next 1 to 2 years. And so they're asking you all as subcommittees, we've mentioned this before, to try to highlight actions that would be lifted up, even as you have the full package of comprehensive things that need to happen as well. So we're going to spend a little time, or most of our time today, really trying to tease those out, and hopefully each of the task groups have some ideas for us about that. We had thought we'd have some time to do this, and we really don't, which is all the other work inside those pathway strategies and actions that you've been working on. We wanted to spend, in addition to looking at those top actions, some time lifting up any concerns we have or other things that we're not super psyched about in that other bulk of work. We don't have a ton of time to do that, and we haven't had pre-reads to do that well. So at the end of this meeting, we're going to talk about how we're going to make some time to do this in the coming week. All right, so the priority actions really are going to be a big part of our conversation today. And we're going to be, as we're talking about priority actions, lifting up these criteria that are going to help us inform them, particularly issues around equity and how a wide range of Vermonters would experience these actions. Okay, so that's what we're doing. We're just going to run through. It's really challenging because to do in 2 hours, 3 task groups and do public comment around that, you really only have about 20 minutes per task group to put a bunch of priority actions out there and then have a short discussion about it. We're going to save some time at the end, what we're calling pulling it all together. So the last half hour is really sort of, okay, looking across all 3 task groups, how are we feeling about this suite of priority actions in the work? But it just means we don't have time for a lot of presentation from each of the task group. We're really going to have to laser in on, show us your pathways or whatever sort of some efficient way of showing us the full suite of stuff, but really spend most of your time laying out a handful of actions and let's start talking about them. This second question, we're not going to get to in the conversations today because we just haven't we haven't had a chance to sit with the sort of updated full suite of pathway strategies and actions. Okay, Billy and Jael, anything else you'd like to say as we're getting going?
Uh, just thanks everyone for sticking with it. We were hoping to get a little bit more information out to folks before today, but weren't able to get many updates. So I think we're largely still working off of the spreadsheet that was posted for our last meeting. And it may be that task groups will bring some updates today. I know Andrew shared some last night, which is great. So yeah, that's about it. Just trying to stay focused. And if we have issues that we can't resolve, we could just put them aside and move on and try to take them up another time.
Thanks, Billy. Um, Judy, you got a hand up? Go ahead, please.
Yes, I talked to Jane last night about the biomass issue, why it was dropped. And she told me she was going to call Billy and make sure it was on the agenda. I don't see it on the agenda. And that there had been amendments for this recommendation and two additional recommendations as far back as 2021. And in 2020, December 2023, they were considered for studies, but they somehow got dropped for 2024. And I think this should be on the agenda. Did
Thank
Billy,
you.
did she talk to you?
Jane did talk to me. She didn't indicate that we want it on the agenda. I think it's part of the task three work. But again, just as I've said, and I've tried to be really clear and consistent about this, the Vermont Climate Council chose not to incorporate those recommendations into the climate action plan. So they weren't dropped. There was an active decision by the council. We can certainly talk as a subcommittee if we want to recommend those again, but I just want everyone to be clear because there's been some confusion about this. So
Well, Jane clearly said there was specific amendments written for them and that the amendments called for a study. The
Right.
study was not done.
yes, that's
And
correct.
in 2023, it got dropped and forgotten about, and she took the blame for it. She said it was my fault that it got dropped. It did not get added into the recommendations for 2024. It's
It,
still on the list.
it's in the plan. It wasn't shared with subcommittees when they were doling out the recommendations that fell under their purview. So that was a mistake. But we've since discussed at length how there is an addendum to the plan regarding biomass. But we'll certainly take it up today. So thanks for flagging that, Judy.
It definitely should be part of the task group 3 conversation. And just for everyone's benefit, I don't know whether Liz Amler or someone could put in the chat what the council adopted. And the council did adopt recommendations as an addendum to the climate action plan to do the study that Judy is discussing. And the question is, the study has not been done yet, right?
Correct.
And what was discussed at the council meeting on November 20th was one recommendation coming out of this subcommittee that could be helpful if this is a priority is find the funding, do the study, right? So that could be something that you all recommend. And let's see if that rises to the top among priorities coming out of, for instance, the task group 3. So there'll definitely be, this is part of it. And if we can't finish up this conversation here, we're going to make some time next week to finish it up. But I think let's definitely get the content of what's in the current action plan. And we'll make sure that that's in. I'm just looking at the chat now myself.
I can get it real quick. I have
Jane
it.
did send it this morning, the biomass recommendations.
Oh, great. Okay. Yeah, just someone could drop those in the chat, the link to those in the chat. They are an addendum to the current climate action plan.
Yeah, I got it right here.
One thing about, I'm just noticing the chat, one thing about as we're going through today and looking at content, if we got a document like, say, Andrew sent a document in last night, or Ryan sent a document in just this morning now, like if we're going to be looking at those kinds of documents, we'll try to either find a way to upload them to the chat, and or Liz in real time might be able to post those online so that folks who don't have a copy of it in their email for some reason can see what we're looking at. So we'll try to do that in real time. It's one of these meetings where stuff was coming in literally 5 minutes before the meeting.
David, do you know what the other two amendments or addendums or whatever they're called were?
To the climate action plan?
Yeah.
There was
Yeah.
one about transportation because it was a pending issue when the primary recommendation fell through because other states decided not to do that program. And so there's one around transportation, and then there's one around biomass, the two.
Oh, she told me there were two additional ones.
Oh, maybe I'm forgetting one. Sorry. Those are the ones that are in my mind. There may be
There
another.
was two related to transportation, I believe. There was one, then another one.
Ah, that's what it is. Okay. All right, so folks, I would recommend we dive in and see how we're doing and see if we have some priority actions emerging from our work. And thanks, Billy. And I would like to start with the emissions reductions and sequestration task group, which is Ryan has been helping to lead. Ryan, I haven't looked at what you sent just before the meeting, so I wonder if you want to give us a quick overview of that. Again, we're looking for presentations that are in the sort of 5-minute mark, and then we can discuss what those priority actions are that you want to put on the table and or other folks in the task group.
Absolutely. Shared a PDF version in the email, so that could be uploaded with the full language to the chat so folks can review it, but there should be no surprises here as it is continuation of the top 5 priorities that have been discussed for 4 or 5 years now. But we'll summarize them high level here in plain language. We tried to summarize the priority action areas as concisely as we could. That being said, language is important and specific, and so make sure to review to, we'll make sure when we're reviewing stuff, we're looking at the actual language, not the summary. This is just trying to get at high level, what does it mean? The first priority action, and I guess I should address, like, what are we talking about? We're talking about 2 things. One, Global Warming Solutions Act has emission reduction requirements. Agriculture is part of that emission reduction standard. And so we have a significant focus on agriculture and farmers in this context to address that portion of the GWSA, and expanding that to think more broadly about net zero 2050, but also incorporating the concept of mitigation, which means both the sequestration of carbon in soils as well as reduction of emissions from these operations. And so both forestry and agriculture are looked at from the sequestration and mitigation side. But that might be why there's more ag here, is because ag has arguably actual targets to meet, whereas forestry does not, but they're both considered in the sequestration and mitigation section of the LUCF. And so that's what we're looking at here. We got some input from Ali Kasiba, who used to be the state climate forester. She's now at UVM, and she shared some recommendations for us, which you see in point 2 there, which is develop a forestry PES program. So this has been up on the screen for a little bit, but I'm just summarize them real quick. It's been about 2 minutes. Continue to invest in existing state ag and forestry programs that have climate mitigation co-benefits. That's the top recommendation, and we'll spend a bit of time explaining why. There is lots of supporting information for numbers 2 through 5, but given we have such limited time, we can dig into those reasonings if folks have questions, but we'll focus on that first one. Number 2, right, we have PES programs in Vermont. So the first one is kind of looking at practices. The second one is looking at performance and setting performance targets, past which operations receive payment from the state or feds for achieving those environmental standards. But we call those PES programs. So continue to invest in the ag PES programs, and then develop a forestry PES program. That's one of the top level recommendations for forestry.
And just for the sake of literally everybody, payment for ecosystem services is the acronym there, right?
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
No problem. To capacitate and help share strategies between farm operations and whatever else, we need to invest in climate change education, outreach, research, and technical assistance programs. We have to protect agricultural soils and forest land from development. Significant development pressures are expanding right now. And that's a real, I think, topic area of interest. And then the 5th one is kind of just a reminder, and I know this is covered in other task groups, but I just want to emphasize that if the operations themselves, the farmers and loggers, are not economically viable, they cannot provide the above climate mitigation resilience benefits. And so viability and addressing the real economic crisis that is occurring in both sectors is something that we feel the Climate Council should be made aware of. Okay, dig into just that first top level one. Here's the specific language around it. We have examples of programs. Need to check in with ANR before we send this in to get the ANR programs listed here. But basically, state programs and USDA are the largest funders of these practices. They provide mitigation benefits as well as other resilience outcomes. And there is a lot of investment in this area, including work that went into researching the greenhouse gas emission inventory and ways to bring both the emission reduction benefits and sequestration benefits together in one reporting framework continues to be one of the goals. And to kind of emphasize this, what has happened, this is the initial climate action plan was passed in 21. But the big programming in this area for agriculture started after Act 64 2015. And so looking at that reporting horizon, 2016 through state fiscal year 24, about 500,000 acres of new conservation practices were implemented by farmers throughout the state. These 500,000 acres resulted in 250,000 kilograms of phosphorus being sequestered and 92,000 metric tons of carbon being sequestered in ag soils and riparian forest buffer biomass. How do you communicate this? It's the same climate cooling effect as removing 16,000 fossil fuel powered passenger vehicles from the road. And during that same time period, Vermonters only registered 15,000. So really significant outcomes from the water investment programs. And just to show where these statistics come from, right? This is the Agency of Agriculture's Water Quality Division reporting dashboard. So you can see the programs that have delivered the field practices, the types of practices that have been funded, the practices that have been funded by year, as well as distribution throughout the state. We can then use this reporting framework to quantify some emissions and net sequestration. You can see the programs that are outlined there are the top programs. The top practice includes cover crop, no-till, seeding down croplands of hay, implementing riparian forest buffers, reduced tillage, pasture and hay, rotational grazing. Here's the sequestration values, and then the translation into maybe a more digestible CAR equivalency. And these are the results. And the synthesis, just to skip down, is those programs, the cost to reduce for each metric ton of CO2 equivalent or kilogram of phosphorus is $80 and $43 respectively. And so trying to elevate this data as an argument to say, hey, this is a really effective and cost-effective pathway for the state of Vermont to invest in to realize climate mitigation benefits and also deliver resiliency outcomes. And so, of course, there's much more to discuss under each one of these headings, but I'll stop there as it's been 7 minutes and folks have heard much of this all before. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, Ryan. And it wouldn't hurt at all to either drop in the chat or put the slide back up with the 5 sort of key things you wanted to signal. I'm happy doing either.
Sure.
I don't believe if Liz Amler could be sent a copy of those slides, she could get it up on the website, or somebody here from the Climate Action Office could do that. Earl, you have your hand up. And again, our goal here is to try to say, are these 5 key things we want to be lifting up amongst the full suite of pathway strategies and actions that this task group is working on? Earl, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about number 2, PES programs. Would you describe what PES means and how this program works, where the funding comes from?
Sure. The 2 PES programs that exist for agriculture are funded jointly between federal programs and state programs. And they are direct payments that are made to farmers for their achieving program standards. One of them is focused on phosphorus and phosphorus losses, and so whole farm accounting. And if they are below a certain threshold, they are compensated for those reductions. The other is more holistic and looks at management of all soil resources on the farm, not just for phosphorus, but other environmental outcomes. That's through USDA NRCS Vermont's Conservation Stewardship Program. And so those federal standards exist, and farmers apply to participate. They are evaluated, and if they meet the standards, they are compensated through the program, and the state program provides an incentive just to apply. So even if you don't meet the standards, it encourages farmers to apply to those programs, to have their farms assessed to see how they figure off against those local environmental targets. And then if they do achieve them, there is another incentive payment that is made there as well. So that's the two programs that exist in Vermont. And I don't have any details about what a forestry PES program would look like. That would be for the forestry sector to noodle on. And so just talking about the ag ones. Thanks.
Well, if I may, if I'm hearing correctly, then you're providing state assistance to help farmers work within the NRCS USDA system to get payments for ecological services that way for their practices. Is that correct?
Yes.
So it's my understanding that the PES working group recommended that Vermont not support carbon trading, not support the PES program, but to find other ways of helping farmers make the transition. I don't like the term payment for ecological services. I think it should be support for services to the environment or ecology or ecosystems. That's a much better term because humans don't provide ecosystem services. All we're here to do is to protect the web so that our mother can provide for us. And so this is just commodifying nature, and it's not helping the climate, because where that money is coming from is from polluters that are using the sequestration to mask on paper their emissions. And so there's no proof anywhere in the world that carbon trading has reduced greenhouse gases.
Earl, can I interrupt just for a second and say, I want to make sure we're not confusing carbon trading with this program of providing economic support to farmers for certain practices, because I think those are two different things. So I just want to
What I just heard was that the state was assisting the farmers to register with these programs through USDA and NRCS, and that's what they are. It's the carbon market.
So
No, they're not
So
carbon.
maybe Earl, you and I can sit down and go through the program specifics, because what you're describing around carbon trading, any of the regulated markets or the voluntary ones, is not what these PES programs are. They are state and federal programs that farmers enroll in and receive taxpayer dollars for exceeding environmental standards set by the program. And so it is a payment to the people doing the work to support them to continue to do that work. That is
where does the money come from?
And the money comes from appropriations from Congress to USDA, as well as appropriations from the Vermont General Assembly to the Agency of Agriculture. And they're distributed through USDA program called the Conservation Stewardship Program. And then the Agency of Agriculture has administered a program as well, the Vermont Farmer Ecosystem Stewardship Program. And so that is the programs to which they're distributed. There's no private money. There's no private, I suppose you could call it a private benefit to the farmer, but they often have to outlay much more than they're compensated to implement those practices. And so it's only a portion of their effort is compensated. But it is something, it's a nominal amount, and it's a nod towards it costs money to change practices, because the economic system farmers have to operate in does not give them a lot of latitude to manage in ways that don't push towards profitability, because if you're not profitable, there's no bandwidth, except for maybe a few operations, to really keep operating. Right? You got to be profitable. And so just want to share that as a response.
What I would
don't
love to
disagree
do,
with you.
Earl, just real quick, this particular program does not appear to have any connection to carbon trading and its funding or in the way it operates. And so I just want to be clear, like, I wonder if we can have some further conversations, maybe not right now, about those distinctions. I want you to feel comfortable that there is not a connection with carbon trading and what's being proposed in this kind of programming.
Yeah, I work closely with White River Conservation District, and you know, we're looking at PES equip and all those, and the USDA is promoting to the farmers to get onto this carbon trading scheme so that they can get paid for what they're doing. I agree they should be paid for what they're doing. I agree with the last statements that Ryan made. We need to develop that kind of program. If you can prove to me that this in no way connects to what USDA is involved with carbon trading, I would change my opinion. I need to see that and to see it clearly. And it would help if you're not doing carbon trading to drop the term PES and call it something else, because that's confusing.
Great. That's really helpful. All right, let's take a few more comments, and I want to make sure we're able to sit with this for a sec. Judy?
Yeah, we've been waiting for weeks to hear this stuff, David, and I'm feeling a bit rushed. To take someone's comment and move it to a side discussion eliminates the opportunity for us to learn. Because what I've looked up on the internet, I also see that it's connected to credit carbon. But anyways, I'm concerned about rushing through this. We've been waiting a long time to hear these. And the other thing is, we talked about incorporating traditional ecological knowledge. Stephen wrote to us yesterday about that. And there's ways that that can be added into these comments or recommendations. And as the president suggested, they should be. And one thing that was discussed quite a bit in the past, and I just want to make sure that's happening in what was said, was, is there coordination and conversation and all these things happening with the Green Mountain Forest? Because one thing we discovered last year was we were working to make all these things happen in the right way. And then in Telegraph, whatever, down in the south, they were going to cut down 40,000 acres or some crazy ass number like that. And nobody even knew about it. So we discovered that there was nobody on these committees from that spectrum, and that we needed to have communication. And I just want to make sure that's included in these recommendations. Thank you.
Thanks, Judy. I'm not sure I understood exactly what needs to be included. Is it, it's about the governance of these programs?
No, you have two hands. You have the state monitoring what's being cut down, and the US government in the Green Mountain Forest was monitoring what was being cut down, and nobody was talking about it.
Aha.
And so it was pretty problematic because it had taken a lot of people by surprise that such a large place was going to be cut down, because there was no communication going on. So one of the recommendations and the discussion we had was, since nobody was on any of these committees from there, that there should be regular meetings and discussion happening with what are they doing? How does that fit into our plan?
Okay.
And so maybe Ryan can explain if that's shown in those 5 things, because I didn't see it, nor did I see TEK.
TEK is included in at least one space, I believe 2 of the 5, in the full write-up. And it was left out for brevity to describe the intent in the summary slides. be coordination between state and federal lands, and as it relates to forestry and logging, is not something I can comment on. I apologize, not my area of expertise.
Well, and that's the problem, Ryan. Anything that has to do with traditional knowledges is an afterthought. It's left out to make it a better sentence. It's left out to make it fit some way else. That's why the president included a comment that it has to
Judy,
be included.
if I could just jump in real quick, if I had more than 5 minutes, we would spend a lot more time sussing out all of the robust thought and care that went into trying to ensure that all of the input that we've heard through this process are represented, and the full write-up gets more at that. And so it's a little unfair when I personally am very frustrated that we can't dig into the details. I feel we need to understand, you know, not only the urgency with which these priorities need to be understood, but also the opportunity. And so I hear you. I also feel frustrated and, apologize that this process, is
I appreciate that, Ryan.
challenging.
And that was the first thing I expressed, that this little to no time to discuss these things, and we've all been waiting. It's problematic in my point.
Okay. JL?
Yeah, so I just want to talk a little bit more about the CSP Assist program. I think it's a really great program, and I think that we could focus on really building that out more and helping. I mean, what we see now is farmers they get paid to get assessed for the program. And then if they get approved, they get another payment. But because of the backload, NRCS backload, workload, and even the state, and a lot of times farmers then don't get approved and they don't get that second payment. I just feel like we could pay farmers more upfront to go through the assessment program or process. And, we have to think about it. Farmers only get paid if they're producing a product. If they're out there in the field harvesting or milking, or, they don't get paid when they sit down and fill out these applications or go meet with NRCS or, so basically we want to give them some sort of payment to join these programs, go through the assessment process. And, the other thing about the CSP program is there's not a lot of technical assistance. So I think like having them meet, like requiring them to have TA advisors throughout the process would be good. Like, so at the White River NRCD I work with, we do farm teams. There's a lot of good farms that sign up for CSP, like I said, who don't get accepted into the program. And so how can we expand this program to help more farmers and really reward the farmers that are doing the right thing? And I don't know if we can make those types of specific recommendations here, but I feel like this is a program that we could expand out, put more funding to kind of reconfigure a little bit, and it would help us meet some of these goals.
Okay. Thanks, JL. Stephen?
Morning, David. Good morning, everyone. So I feel like much of what we've been working on in the Group 2 section is covered in these 5 points Ryan has brought forward, and that's gratifying to see that. And I would say at the outset, just in case anybody wants to dig in further to CSP, we've been farming in the Upper Valley since 1996, and we are currently have 200 acres of forest and 60 acres of farmland enrolled in CSP. So and I was an active participant in the PES process, and strong advocate for the CSP Plus program. And I agree with Jael that we can just continue to build it out, and I hope that Earl and Judy's concerns can be addressed. My understanding is that these are farm bill dollars that are coming through federal, through NRCS and USDA agencies. I just wanted to add, hoping that there's a way we can nuance in the subtext, hope to continue to move these all these great achievements that have been accomplished by Vermont farmers more towards agroecological or organic regenerative practices. For instance, no-till, though certainly is better than annual tillage. The concerns around glyphosate remain and are very pressing. And just in general, there's so much opportunity for us in terms of improving soil health through a just transition towards more organic, more regenerative practices, even on the scale of the large dairy farms in the state. So I just want to underline both the concerns and the opportunities that are present there, and also just to really underline being really happy to see forestry being given, the forestry sector being given equal weight in terms of the type of outreach and support that is going to be necessary.
Thanks, Stephen. So the kinds of things I've heard so far in reaction to what Ryan's been putting out there, and again, this is consistent with what Ryan's been presenting to the group in the last few months, but the reactions to it have been the term of payment for ecological services is a term that causes some confusion. And so let's think thoughtfully about that and also address concerns such as what Earl's brings up, that there's some discomfort around carbon trading. Let's make sure we're not conflating these things. That's one. A second is the importance of traditional ecological knowledge and the ability to weave that more directly into the text that people can see. If it's in there, but it's just not in the text and the way we see it, how do you get it up in there in the way that's more visible? And then there's on the forestry side, and I'm not quite sure whether it's for this group or maybe it's task group 3, this issue of connections between the federal and the state forestry activity and making sure that there's appropriate coordination, connection, communication going on there. And then finally, what Joelle and Stephen just said is, can we make a special shout out to the state CSB program as something that seems valuable and worth addressing? Joelle had very specific comments around, enhanced technical assistance. I feel like, Joelle, that seemed like the second point in Ryan's 5-point thing, right? So I think that's consistent what we're doing. And also trying to think about those situations where farms don't get accepted, like then what? So those are things that could be used to improve what Ryan's put out there. I also think, Ryan, that final one you had, number 5, feels like a nice handoff to the second task group, right? Because that's what the second task group is all about. And so it may end up that number 5 doesn't need to be coming out of this task group. It ends up being the priority actions of what we're about to hear from task group 2, right? Which is all about viability and and abilities of farms and forest economies to thrive. Okay, so
Could give us an extra one of the 15 to put something else in there. Yeah,
right,
and I was make sure we highlight it because it's an important theme that runs throughout all of these, I think.
Right, and Ryan, I was actually curious that you didn't include as one of your 5 the sort of accounting stuff that we've spent a lot of time talking about, and making that a priority action as well. Is that the state?
It's in there in the first one.
Okay.
In the full text, it's in there.
So
update the greenhouse gas inventory to account for both carbon sequestration and emission reduction benefits from agriculture.
Right. Because definitely you all as a subgroup and have spent quite a bit of time talking about that already. Okay. So
just before we move on, I just want to second Stephen's appreciation for the equal treatment of forestry here, and offer Ryan that happy to help fill in some programs from our agency to round this out.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Okay. So I'm curious. So with those points of being clear about what we're talking about with payment for ecological services, and maybe even shifting to a different word that really says what it is, and making sure we're staying away from the carbon trading, which doesn't have a lot of support from all members of this subcommittee. That's one. Getting traditional ecological knowledge in there, focusing on the CSP Assist program in particular, making sure there's equal forestry representation in the programs and the other things that are the shout out, right? And then let's make sure we don't lose the thought about the coordination between the federal and the state forestry conversations, and see whether that pops up better in different task groups, or we'll figure out where that shows up. Those seem like the ways to make this stronger from what Ryan just put up there. We've been wanting to do a quick pause on public comment for each of these task groups before we shift gears. And I think we should shift gear to a second task group, because I really want to get to that pulling it all together moment at the end. But let me just say, if you're a member of the public, or you are not a member of this task group, of this subcommittee, and you have a quick comment for the subcommittee before it switches over to the next task group, now's a great time to jump in on these topics in particular. So let me just do a quick pause if anybody who's been joining our meeting has a quick comment to make about these topics. Zach?
Thank you, David. Good morning, everybody, and appreciate the chance to weigh in as you're discussing this morning. I'm going to try to make this as targeted as I can. I don't know for sure how well this fits in at this moment compared to some of the other conversations that are coming up, but I want to address a concern that I have with the generality, I guess I would say, of the recommendations that I just saw posted on the screen. I am hoping that this will result, what you're all recommending will include even more specific targeted recommendations. And to tie back to something that Judy Dow just mentioned, just 2 days ago, the U.S. Forest Service released the draft record of decision for the Telephone Gap Integrated Resource Project. And for the first time, the Forest Service quantified the greenhouse gas emissions from a major logging project. This is a big deal. It's happening in Vermont. It's never happened anywhere else with this level of clarity for the public. And the amount of emissions that will come from this one logging project are equal to about 60,000 gas-powered passenger vehicles, 60,000 gas-powered passenger vehicles operating over a single year, or about 2/3 of the annual emissions of the McNeil biomass power plant. That's from this one logging project. There are multiple logging projects of this size ongoing in the Green Mountain National Forest. This group can't tell the federal government how to operate. But what this group does have the ability to do is to have a major impact on the way that state lands are managed. And so, about 2% of the annual timber harvest volume, that's it, in Vermont, comes from state lands. But that's a significant contribution to greenhouse gas emissions, because it's another 2% that comes from federal lands. And I just gave you how much greenhouse gas comes from one project out of the 2% of the total harvested volume in Vermont every year from federal lands. So as you are considering what to take action on, there are these very, I would say, low-hanging fruit opportunities as far as state lands are concerned. We have a lot of control. We can't control what private landowners do. We can't control what the federal government does. But to meet the goals of the Global Warming Solutions Act and the Climate Action Plan, we can take more meaningful action at the state policy level. So I'm putting that out there as just a clear example of how forestry has a much greater impact than we've acknowledged to date. And I'm not even holding up that analysis of greenhouse gas emissions as being perfect, but using the Forest Service's own numbers, we can see for the first time how significant the impact of logging is. So I'll leave that there, and I look forward to the rest of the discussion today. Thank you.
Thanks, Zach. Appreciate it. Cheryl?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for taking my comment now. I just have one thing one thing to add, actually, is that with regard to the recommendations that we just heard about, and the, well, to use the term that has been used, payment for ecological services, to the to farmers and foresters. I think that since biomass is such a controversial topic and it's not decided and not determined yet, I think that giving payment to forestry for logging that involves cutting in order to burn biomass, that I think that there shouldn't be money given to that purpose. I don't know how to write this up, how to write the recommendation up, but I think that that is something to take into consideration since that's a really important piece of the climate and biodiversity issues that we have going on. So that's about it. Just something to think about and to be more, I don't know, specific.
Thanks, Cheryl. Appreciate that. Yeah. Okay. All right, so let's jump over to the second task group and see what's going on over there. I have not seen any updated materials, so let me just check in from task group 2 around the viability and economics. Who's on deck to talk about that?
I can make the attempt to do that for our group, and I did send. So there's a Word doc that I sent that we can reference, or I could share if I have sharing capabilities.
I can give you sharing capabilities, no
Okay.
problem.
Yeah.
Just give me 1 second. Oh, you have sharing capabilities, you're good.
Great.
This is gonna be.
Okay. Is that everyone see that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a little
Yeah.
small if you want to make it a little bigger.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, and yeah, just to note that I don't think we're quite to a concise 5, but through some conversations through email, I think I'll note that these first 2 strategies and the 3 actions that fall under them, there's probably a chance for us to kind of consolidate these. So, yeah, so just to say there's still, I think, a little work to be done to get some consensus around what our exact 5 are. So yeah, I'll go through this. So for strategy 19A, which is oriented around increasing technical assistance, we have 2 actions there: develop and fund climate adaptation planning and training for all farmers and foresters, and that includes, let me remove that comma, that includes education about TEK. And that's also, I just wanted to acknowledge too that this right now is the only action where we've been able to integrate language around TEK, but I think there's some other opportunities in these recommendations or in these actions and recommendations to do the same. And number 6 is enhance and support funding for TA to farmers, which would, for example, include fully funding UVM extension to support climate adaptation training for agriculture, support other institutions of higher ed in this endeavor, landowners, which would include climate adaptation training, and that would also include FPR's forest and climate program and municipalities. So yeah, and then strategy 20B, which is about fostering partnerships at the state, federal, nonprofit, private sector level, involves our action there, which is dedicating funds to support the Vermont Natural Resources Conservation Districts and farmer watershed orgs, with the specific objective of allowing them to reach other farmers and do farmer to farmer ed about improved soil manure management. And I feel like yeah, there's some language we've developed here, which is around changing this a bit to include language around climate resilience adaptation. So yeah, you can see that these first three, they're all speaking to the need for enhancing technical assistance capacity, and there's so many, organizations and service providers that fall under this umbrella, and I think just finding that balance of identifying those partners and the specific ways that those programs and TA services can be supported is our next task of kind of consolidating these three. So those are
Question for you, Bonjay.
yeah.
Real quick. I see the first one makes a reference to forestry, but it looks like the other two are focused primarily on kind of agricultural management. Is that correct, or?
Yeah, I think, Billy, the only in 6 there is the reference to the forest and climate program, but I think that's also another element of having specificity on the forestry side of like what programs and services we could identify.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, if you're open to potentially kind of building that out a little bit on the forest side, that would be great. So thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, Earl.
Didn't know I was going to be called on that quickly. Thank you.
Yeah.
I thank you for adding that to number 4, TEK, because that's the development and funding of adaptation and training. I would suggest on 20, strategy 20B, where you have foster partnerships at all levels, state, federal, nonprofit. I would add indigenous or tribes.
Yeah.
And private sector. So that then kind of overarches what's going on below that in those other points. So
Yeah.
I think that would be helpful to do that.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I just threw it in there right now. So
yeah, so you have those two that kind of overarches everything else, and I think that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Earl. So yeah, continuing on, and yeah, noting that integration and yeah, some need to identify some specific forestry elements here. Then we've got strategy 20C, which is looking at programs for farmland access, ownership, conservation, and leveraging that funding to increase land access. This is our specific action related to that is investigating innovative funding mechanisms for assisting with implementation of climate smart ag practices, crop insurance for diversified Vermont seal farms, and emergency recovery following extreme weather events to better respond when climate change related events occur. This, I think we have opportunity to include a specific legislative request. So there is a farm emergency fund effort that's happening that has some specific appropriation requests. So that could fall under this. And I think, yeah, we're open also to just ensuring that we're being more specific about the types of programs or that could be supported. So I think there's opportunity to add some specificity to that. Then 21A gets more into the kind of economic development support. So developing, expanding, and sustaining local markets specifically for food, agriculture, and forest products in ways that ensure food sovereignty and security and provide for all Vermont's peoples. And this, I want to acknowledge, is some revised language that I was working on very late and have not necessarily shared with my 2 other group members, though we had this is adopted language from what was kind of in our spreadsheet, but I just added some specificity. So this is support robust funding for supply chain resilience and state food security, including significant investment, storage, processing, and distribution infrastructure, prioritize investments to farm and food businesses, and acknowledging too here that the forestry, we need to include some forestry elements here that have climate resilience and mitigation goals. So funding would include minimum base funding for working lands of 1.5 million and 6 million for the Ag Development Grant Program for the next 3 years, which would amount to 18 million over 3 years for that program. So yeah, again, I think I'd love to include some specificity around the forest product side. I know we got some public comments about some elements of that we could include here. And working lands does, included in that is money for forest products too. So strategy 21D. So this is another, just acknowledging to my group members that this was something added late, but 21D was ensuring equitable access to local foods, culturally relevant foods, land, funds, grants, and technical assistance for people who have been historically marginalized and come from impacted communities. And the action there is to uplift and resource the work of Vermont Abenaki and other Indigenous peoples in the state, Vermont Environmental Justice Network, Vermont Relief Collective, and other BIPOC peoples and organizations in Vermont. And I think we could probably also include maybe the Land Access and Opportunity Board as a part of that. And then finally, strategy 21E, which I just want to note that technically the food security and sovereignty plan, so we do have a food security roadmap that has been developed, but the action specifically related to that strategy is to work to adopt state and regional level policies, procedures, and plans to ensure that the Vermont food supply is sufficient to withstand global or national food supply chain disruptions caused by climate change and other disasters. And we might be able to work this into our language around supply chain kind of resilience and food security that was above. So I think, yeah, there's still a little opportunity here to revise and integrate some of the language. So that's it.
Fantastic. All right, so if I'm counting that right, it's about six priority actions you're really lifting up here, Jake.
Yeah, your accounting is probably better than mine right now. So
no, that's fantastic. Yeah,
yeah.
No, that's really great. And as you see, there's some overlap from what Ryan was saying. So some things are very complementary from Ryan's stuff. So it'd be nice to actually look across all that.
And do you want me to keep keep this up right now as we're?
Why don't you? And then we can refer back to specific things would be helpful. Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
Judy? Wait, you're on mute, Judy.
Thank you. Jake, could you scroll back to, there you go, let's see.
Yeah.
The one where you talk about 22, I think it was. Where's 22? Down, I guess, just a little.
Or it might be 22 here.
Okay.
Yeah, because that's just referencing the rows in our spreadsheet. That's what those numbers are.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Emergency recovering following extreme. So investigating innovative funding for mechanism for assessing and implementation of climates. This is little for me to read. Smart agricultural practice. Yeah, have you considered, since these flood areas are often in the ancient pathways of the rivers, the intervals, whatever you want to call them, have you considered an innovative event might be moving the damn field out of the interval?
Yeah, so we do. I'll say there is an action, and I don't know if it's under this strategy, but it does speak about support for like relocation of farms in those types of areas. So again, like being more specific here, we could just identify that as like one of the elements that is a part of this action.
It just seems like such a waste of money to keep paying year after year after year for the same areas that get flooded year after year after year, when you could probably pay way less just to move the field.
Yeah, it's and there's a lot of conversations about this happening in different places, and I think it's trying to recognize like the balance of some of those fields are the most productive agricultural
Well, of
places
course,
in Vermont, and just say that like there are some of those farms are located in areas where like there is not a viable option to move it somewhere else. And so is there, you know, a balance of there may be areas where that relocation can happen. And then for those where it can't, you know, is there a way to recognize that also those farm fields are serving, you know, a larger ecological purpose as part of the floodplain, and they may be reducing impact in, you know, other areas of the of a town or community. So
of
yeah,
course, it's more healthy because that's the relationship with the river, right? It brings all the nutrients down.
right.
But if it's gonna flood, if there's a pattern of it flooding regularly, there should be a plan B here, is what all I'm saying.
Yep.
In the other place, and another place, no, I didn't write down the number. You used the word working lands, and I thought right there, 32. Whoop, you went by it.
Yeah, and that's a reference to the program.
Okay, I thought we had a discussion about not using the words working lands because all land is working.
If we can get them to change the name of the Working Lands Enterprise Initiative, we could, yeah, because that is just the name of the program and the that the agency
Okay,
administers.
so if you're gonna give funding that would include base funding for working land enterprise, what are they considering to be working lands?
It's for agriculture and forestry um,
So are you sure
operations.
you want to fund somebody who just has a plan to use the money for half the land?
This is an existing state program that's been up and running for a number of years. I
That
can
doesn't
provide.
mean it's right.
It's a
That's what I'm
grant
trying to get.
program. It's grants.
Right. I understand everything you're saying, but if we're saying all land is working land, or some of us are saying, I see there's a comment in there that there was no consensus, but we don't have consensus on half the things we talk about. Um, it's it's wrong to look at all land not being working. And if we're going to fund working lands to give out grants for working lands to just farmers and foresters, what about the other half of the land that's working?
Yeah, I think Judy, that falls under, you know, uh, there's other actions and strategies that we're discussing that speak to supporting, you know, that things that fall outside of just sort of commercial agriculture and forest operations. And it just, I think in the way that Vermont has developed this concept, yeah, working lands in use means, in this case, ag and forestry. That doesn't necessarily make it right. So yeah,
Do you mind
I
if I,
understand I
do you mind if I
understand the
jump
point
in
you're
here?
making. Yeah.
So it sounds like it's important to think about other types of support for land. We're talking about supply chain resilience. One pathway is through the Working Lands Enterprise Initiative, which is an existing program. There may be other pathways that would be helpful. And maybe that the following, if you scroll down a little bit, Jake, the next piece around, you know, really focus on the work of Vermont, Abenaki, and other indigenous peoples and environmental justice. Like, in doing that work, you can help to address some of these situations where we think, hey, there's actually a bigger lens that needs to be taken here.
Yeah,
So hopefully these complement each other.
Well,
yeah,
like
and
the lake is working land.
we do have there are some actions that speak to supporting programs for other activities that are not like commercial farming, and providing like educational support. So that's something we can consider too, as making a part of our sort of suite of recommendations here.
All
And I
right,
think sorry. Go ahead, Judy. I see
my
a bunch of
last,
hands up too.
yeah, I see that, but that's what I was talking about. There's no time to actually learn and discuss. The other comment I had was on, do you feel that the state and regional level policies and plans work for the food, where you're talking about the one for food?
Yeah,
Work
this one.
to adopt state regional level policies, procedures, and plans to ensure the Vermont food supply. Do you think they're working now?
The ones that exist with that intent, I think, are doing a good job, but I don't think they are sufficiently supported at the scale that they need to be. So like just as a for example, and this is actually more relates to maybe COVID than climate change, but when we did see a lot of supply chain disruption during the COVID period, a lot of the sort of local food system programs that have been supported and amplified by state policy really help to deliver greater resilience to Vermont communities and provide food to schools and retailers and institutions in really important ways that do have a real impact on our state's resilience and our regional resilience from these like larger supply chain disruptions that happen. So I think they are working. They have proven to work, and now I think it's more about how do we bring the appropriate scale of support to those programs so that they're more accessible, available, prevalent, the norm rather than the exception.
So that's my question. Do you want to just work to adopt what's there, or do you want to work to improve?
Yeah, improve or enhance, increase. Yeah, I think there's
Whatever.
that. Yeah.
Because if they're not doing the exact thing you want, then why work to adopt them? Why don't you work to improve them?
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe wording change there would be helpful.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Judy.
Andrew?
Yes, going all the way back to your first listed priority action, just point out that there's a pretty good overlap. We also had some of the 19 priorities in ours. So I'll mention this when we're presenting, but I think there's an opportunity to converge a priority action from the two groups, and maybe sort of refine it a little bit to capture some of the things that we were trying to do, and I'll mention that later. But I just wanted to point out that there's pretty direct overlap there.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity to converge around this the TA components, and then in turn be really specific about like the programs and services that need additional or enhanced support and resources. So yeah, I'd love that to be our goal across the three groups.
That'd be great. Yeah, absolutely. Ryan?
Thanks. Jake wants to really appreciate the framing you've offered here. I think it's some of the most important topics that the Climate Council should be made aware of as it relates to agroforestry operations and the role they play in resilience. I want to respond very briefly to 2 comments you made, Judy. One about flooding. The intervale you use as an example, and I don't think we should count out the ability for humans to adapt to changing environments and the plans they've put in place from the flooding last year to this year to get food out of the flooding area and to protect infrastructure. Where else are we going to grow food that close in significant quantity to, the largest population center in Vermont? It provides a very, valuable incubation opportunity for farms, but more importantly, like agriculture develops around floodplains because the best soils are there. And moving people, there's not a lot of land, especially in Chittenden County, for an operation that size to go to. Final point on that, it's now a moderate drought across most of Vermont. We're not only going to be dealing with flooding. Irrigation is going to become a larger practice that more farmers are going to need to adopt. And a river such as the Winooski has unlimited potential relative to the scale of Vermont operations to provide watering that they need, whether for livestock or crops. And so that has to be something that we consider. And the closer you are to the water, the less pumping you have to do. So there's definitely something to be said for examining that a little bit. And then I'll stop there, but I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thanks, Ryan. So there is some real complexity on the issue of land in valleys, farmland. Yeah. Billy?
Thanks. Echo the appreciation for Jake and this group. And I know you did say it earlier, Jake. I just want to kind of reiterate and point to a couple places. I think it would be great if folks were willing to integrate some reference to forest management, forest managers, especially around investigating innovative funding mechanisms for climate smart forestry practices, as well as emergency recovery and falling weather events. The forest products sector was hit real hard by that as well, but from the flooding as well. And then, wherever there's kind of reference to food security and local foods and things of that nature, hoping we can also call out local forest products that Vermonters rely on, and making sure we're trying to elevate those in our state and region. So if hopefully those are kind of non-controversial and things that we can try to incorporate as this gets refined.
Thanks, Billy. Jael?
Yeah, so I have some issue with the Working Lands Enterprise Grant. I applied for it several times. It's a really competitive grant. I know you want to, but I don't know if it's really, if that program is doing what we want it to do. It's really about farms, or it feels like it's more focused on labor. And like if you can prove that what you're applying for is going to give you, create more job opportunities, then you qualify. It doesn't feel like it supports farmers to be more sustainable in their practices. And so I'm a little, I don't know if we want to focus so much on that. One place I don't, it's mentioned throughout the actions and strategies, but putting more funding towards supporting food assistance programs like crop cash, for people to go to farmers markets and purchase food directly from farmers at farmers markets, and like enhancing those programs or putting funding toward those programs, I think would help farmers more than like expanding the Working Lands Enterprise Initiative.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thanks, Jael.
I see Ryan put his hand up, maybe a response, but just to respond to that, I did see that, Stephen, you put a comment in there too, to say that Working Lands, you received a grant and it was very helpful. And I think, Jael, some of the issue of the competitiveness has been a lack of sufficient funding. So there are a lot of applications and then a limited ability to meet the need. And also another issue has been year over year variability in available funds. So it's been hard to predict, how much will be available and whether it will be worth applying, depending on how much is available. And then I think just the second thing I'll say is I think there's lots of farms that could provide information about the benefits on their viability as an operation by receiving funding through working lands. And yes, there is a component of supporting job creation, but also job retention and overall viability of the farm or forest operation. So I think it has been one of the vital economic development tools we've had for agriculture, and it has been grossly underfunded, which creates which then in turn I think creates a lot of frustration, because a lot of people get denied and don't get funded. And so I think, for me, that feels more like an issue of the available resources that the program has to provide. And I think there's also, I think as the recommendation reads too, there may be other ways to prioritize, certain elements of sustainability or climate resilience as a funding criteria too. So I think that's just another thing to consider.
Thanks. Ryan, Earl, and then let's pause because I want to make sure we have time for the third group.
I pasted a link in the chat to the applications that were funded in fiscal year 24. And I have a feeling they really do suit the needs of, holistic approach to expanding our ag economy. I'm looking at small farm diversification and transition grants, right? $10,300 for certification to build out value-added production, $11,253 to establish on-farm poultry parting, $14,900 for diversifying with fruit and nut trees, $15,000 for establishing an on-farm creamery for value-added dairy, right? There's, hay scales, compatibility, right? They're addressing many different sectors, and there's too much demand. But I do think this is a program that does a lot of the things that I've been hearing from people as goals. It does exactly that. But I will agree very much with Chick. It is very under-resourced. They get too many applications, and it's so hard to choose, even when they're all good applications, right? It's very challenging. So that's all I want to throw in here. Thanks.
Thanks, Ryan. Helpful context. Earl?
Oh, finally. I keep getting dropped to the back because every time somebody drops their hand, they drop mine at the same time, and I don't know why that's happening.
Oh, that's weird.
But at any rate, I wanted to remind everyone that when lands are flooded, the crops have to be destroyed. They're not suitable for human consumption. So I think what Judy was referring to are these bottomlands that are typically flooded, have to be repaired. We use state money or state and federal money to repair that. And then they flood again. And so that was the issue there. I have lots of friends that had to destroy their crops, huge corn crops and other crops, gardening, because they got floodwaters, across there. So the bottom line here is our streams are contaminated. That's why. And that has to be resolved. If you want to grow in floodplain, have clean water. The other thing is working lands. I see that interchangeable throughout all the documents everywhere with the state, working lands and managed lands. Why can't we be consistent and just drop working lands and call it managed lands and solve that discussion? So those are my comments. Thank you, William.
Okay. All right. So in terms of some specific feedback for Jake on this. In addition, Jake, you've been taking notes in real time, which has been really helpful in the document. I'll just note a couple things that, you know, hadn't been tucked in real time. One is including mention of forestry in several of these things. And I think Billy offered to help with that.
Mhm.
We just talked about the complexity of farms that get flooded frequently. Like that's tricky, and there's some competing things. We're not sure exactly if you all are there right now to be able to say something that addresses all these complexities of that. But it's a thing, and not quite sure what to do about it. On the Working Lands Enterprise Initiative, the name doesn't sit well with this group, given what Earl just said. Although this group could recommend the name get changed, but it's not really it's not language that this group chooses, right? This group needs to choose the language that goes in its report. But in addition to the name, there's been frustrations with that initiative. Maybe those frustrations are just for lack of funding. Maybe it's something else. And there was a specific recommendation of like, might we be thinking about funding for supporting farmers markets and other types of pathways as well? Those are the
Actually,
notes
David,
I
can
have.
I just,
Yeah.
food assistant programs, so people can access Vermont grown local.
Yeah, and this was one of the incomplete elements of that action, Giles, is that there are some other actions that have those programs listed that I think we can integrate into that. This particular one.
Great. All right. And so as before, I'm happy to take a moment for some very brief comments, and then I'd love to jump into task group 3. But if you've been listening to this conversation, you're not a member of the subcommittee, and you'd like to offer a comment, this is a good time to do it on the work of task group 2. Viability issues. Okay.
Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Jake, for walking us through that. And thanks everyone for providing good feedback on it. So task group 3 is the final one here. And Andrew, I think you have the most recent set document to share here. Would you like to share your screen with it? What would you like to do?
I'm not great at sharing screens. I
can share it if you want me to.
There's a summary slide that I just did this morning that I think will be helpful rather than.
Oh, is it from you? Hang on a second.
Yeah, there's a chat. It's in the chat. Liz actually put a link in there.
Oh, nice. Okay, hang on. It must be at the very beginning.
It's probably a little ways back.
Just sent it again, so it should be there.
Just drop it again. Thank you.
Thanks. Trust me, you don't want to see me fumble through trying to share my screen.
Okay, hang on one second.
All right. So, I mean, while you're doing that,
here, I can share my screen with this if you want me to.
Okay, that would be awesome. Thank you, David. So we submitted a spreadsheet last night that summarized our actions and that has a lot more detail, but I thought it was useful from the other two groups to just have it all on one slide. So I just put this together. And you will note that there are 6 actions, but I will address that here in a second. I guess I would say that Judy and Earl and I really focused on prioritizing a set of actions that articulate the opportunity to really utilize natural systems or ecosystems and use nature-based solutions, traditional ecological knowledge and indigenous knowledge to address climate change mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. So how do we use natural systems and nature-based solutions was kind of our overall focus. And these are the 6 priority actions that we came up with. As you may remember, we had action groups and just over the past day, try to convert that to more to actions that are a little bit more specific. although they still have sort of multiple components to them. And the first one is pretty similar to what Theme 2 just presented, and specifically it's really about state agencies working with partners in higher education to develop climate adaptation, education and outreach materials, technical assistance and training for farmers, foresters, and other lands and waters caretakers. And I think that might be a place where we think about this a little more broadly than just farmers and foresters. We're also thinking more broadly about lands and waters caretakers, and incorporating guidance based on not just Western science, but braided traditional ecological knowledge and indigenous knowledge, and representing a diversity of perspectives, and reaching out to a diversity of audiences. So, but basically this is about technical assistance with more detail. I would encourage you to look at the spreadsheet if you want to have more of the detail that we talked about. But I feel like this could be, we're happy to let Theme 2 take this action over, and then we'd have 5, because I think it's pretty similar, and I think we could work together to get this just right for this whole technical assistance set of actions. The second one here is about incentivizing nature-based solutions and traditional ecological knowledge. Basically, that state agencies shall prioritize and incentivize through various financial mechanisms nature-based solutions and traditional ecological knowledge and indigenous knowledge for addressing climate change impacts through state regulatory programs, assessments, planning, prioritization frameworks, and funding programs. So this is really just making sure that we're thinking about these nature-based solutions and TEK knowledge and solutions as a regular part of how we are addressing climate change, rather than structural solutions, thinking about nature-based solutions and incentivizing those with existing and new programs. And then the third one down there is really about management. And Judy, I wrote working lands there, and I didn't have a chance to correct that because you're absolutely right. I don't like that term either. But management of these lands to address climate change and achieve multiple goals. Really, this is the part of it where we're talking about climate mitigation using nature-based solutions that also addresses resilience, enhances water quality, and is focused on restoring and conserving biological diversity across the state. That by using this nature-based approach, we can actually achieve those multiple goals through the same set of nature-based actions. So we really want to focus our attention on doing that and achieving these multiple goals, and therefore being able to take advantage of, for example, clean water programs, which are talking about some of the same programs, and agricultural programs that are talking about some of the same actions, and that will help us achieve these multiple goals by working together. And then the fourth one here is focused on flood resilience, where state agencies and the legislature have this opportunity to provide for healthy connected river corridors, floodplains, and wetlands, and prioritize restoration and conservation, and incentivize water storage in headwaters and natural areas to promote flood resilience and biodiversity through the expansion of wetland, floodplain, riparian forest, and river corridor easements that better compensate land and water caretakers for restoring, managing, and conserving these water storage areas. So this is pretty consistent. One of the things that we haven't talked about, I don't think, in this group is I'm not going to get the name right, but the recent act that passed in the last legislature is Act 121, I think, flood resilience. I think there's opportunities to build off that act here and really focused on nature-based solutions as part of increasing flood resilience. And again, that has multiple benefits beyond just flood resilience. The fifth one here is really about strategic conservation, using things like Vermont conservation design to be strategic about how we conserve lands, and specifically that the state agencies shall promote healthy, connected, oops, sorry, that's the wrong one. State agencies will work with partners to promote strategic and equitable landscape connectivity in forest blocks, conservation planning, and implement goals towards 30 by 30, using the frameworks that are available, including Vermont conservation design and braiding in traditional ecological knowledge and indigenous knowledge. This conservation planning and implementation will allow at least 9% of Vermont's forest to become or be maintained as old forest, specifically targeting 15% of the matrix forest blocks that's within the Vermont conservation design and including the national forests to achieve this condition. And as part of that, ensuring the protection of sacred sites. So we kind of folded a lot into this, but really trying to get at being strategic about landscape connectivity and forest blocks, and the conservation of old forest and protection of sacred sites are all sort of built into this. And the last one is really about, as we are focusing on and promoting renewable energy, that we are doing so thoughtfully and citing and avoiding the impacts that might come out of that. And specifically, state agencies shall utilize financial incentives, siting policies, rules, and regulations to motivate solar and wind energy capacity on new buildings, parking lots, as well as previously disturbed and developed areas, while avoiding and minimizing forest clearing and use of agricultural land for renewable development. And also minimizing or eliminating the use of biomass as a renewable energy source. So bringing that biomass issue in as part of this discussion on avoiding impacts of renewable energy. So that's a lot of language, but that's what we came up with for a set of 6 actions, the first of which we're happy to move over to group 2. And I see Judy has her hand up, and I would appreciate Judy and Earl adding to what was pretty hard to encompass in just a couple minutes.
Thanks, Andrew. Appreciate that. Yeah. Judy?
Andrew has been our guiding light in typing and getting everything done. And last night I saw a flurry of emails, but I had a Zoom class, so I couldn't respond to any of them about changing. And now that I see them like this, I don't even recognize them as what we talked about. I don't know why they had to be changed from last time, but they were. Our first one addressed biomass. I don't even see biomass on here. And that was after discussion of presenting it and asking for a change. So I don't know where these come from. I don't recognize them as the ones we presented previously.
Judy, I mean, I can respond partially to that. This is a summary slide because I thought it was useful to have it on one slide. But the document that we submitted is our full set of actions that we agreed on. What is shown right there on this screen. So I apologize if in my summarizing, I lost the key components of it, but hard to fit them all in one slide. But what did happen just in the last day was this idea of action groups not being considered the way to go. And so I'm trying to convert those action groups into something that more looks like priority actions by states, state agencies and legislatures. And given that I did it last night, we didn't have a chance to review it together. So
right. So this is new to us, to me and Earl, right?
Yep.
So where is the mention? I don't even see it on here. We had a meeting after our last meeting to add biomass as our first one. Where is
Yep.
that?
It's all the way at the bottom. Yep.
No, we had a meeting to move it to our first priority.
Well, it's under this action group 6, and then you
I
can
know,
see
but
that
after a discussion with this committee and Billy Billy suggested we put it as our first priority. We met and we did. We put it as our first priority, not our 85th or whatever it is. I don't
Yeah,
even
I guess
see-
I don't think that action group 6 is a lower priority than action group 1, right? But yeah, we can certainly put it at the top.
I
Well,
want to be clear though, with on the biomass, if there's a specific recommendation around biomass, whether it's funding the study that the council said they wanted to have happen or something like that, it's okay to pull that out and make it its own thing separate from sort of citing of renewable energy.
well, we didn't know that the study wasn't done till last night. I've been requesting it for 7 months. I've been requesting a copy of the report, even wrote to you about it. And you said you didn't know anything, wrote to everybody. And last night, don't shake your head, no, I got a copy of the email.
Okay.
For 7 months, I've been asking for the report. And last night, I finally talked to Jane, and Jane said it was never done. So we didn't know we had to request a study be done. We
Okay.
just put it on there as a recommendation to be addressed again, because it clearly wasn't addressed. It was dropped off.
It sounds like it'd be important to pull out as something separate from this group, something around around biomass, whether it's, get the funding, do the study, or whatever you want to do. It sounds like it'd be something important for you to put in here and have a conversation about as a subgroup.
Well, it's important to not be so rushed that recommendations are turned in without us even seeing them. We turned our recommendations in together.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and that's why we really want to make sure before the council meets on the 16th that you all have a chance to sit with these full files in addition to summaries of sort of priority actions. And so I think before we end today, it's finding the time next week, first of all, so that you all have some time to sit with it and read everything. And second of all, then you can talk through it one more time and make sure you're comfortable with how it's all landing. I do want to take the point here of the biomass, pulling it out, and I just want to test if you were to pull biomass out separately, it is essentially what you'd want to do, say, hey, council, you said you want to do a study as the next step. Go do the study, find the money, make it happen. Right. So the council could take that on and then said to the legislature, you haven't funded this study. That's the most important thing to do next. Is that what you'd want to do?
Yes.
Okay.
But I also don't trust the council because it's been delayed. So I'm also working to create a capstone project to do the same thing.
Okay, great. On this issue of biomass, just quickly, I saw Earl, you raised your hand in the Zoom screen as well. If we were to just pause for a second on that, and then I want to get back to all the other content that we just looked at, but quickly on the biomass issue, pulling out a priority action of, get the funding, do the study, seems like something that might work. Earl, did you want to jump in on that?
I do. I keep getting bumped to the end of the line. I don't know why my hand keeps getting dropped, and then I put it back up and I'm last again. That keeps happening. So somebody has the controls there, and I don't think they're doing it on purpose, but for some reason that keeps happening. Yeah, the other thing that I want to add to what Judy said was, and we put it in our notes, is for a moratorium for this study, because studies are a way of just dropping things. It can take forever, and then it's got to go back to the legislature and on and on. Meanwhile, biomass facilities are requesting permits. And so we have to stop this and really address this issue before it gets out of hand. And it's not about siting, and biomass does not fit under renewable energy. It's not renewable energy. We need to stop that. We're the only state that calls it that. And so, let's have a moratorium on siting new facilities, but it is to prevent this runaway technology before we get it under control. And as Judy can tell you, these biomass facilities are polluters. You can look at the permit for the Linden facility that's being proposed, and you can see how much carbon dioxide and other contaminants are going to come out of that extraction of syngas from pyrolysis to boil water to make energy. And so this is something that we need to get a handle on. It's about the emissions more than the siting. Of course, the siting is important because of the emissions. So, that's what we're in the middle of. And I would like to add this as a different bullet point rather than lumping it under siting and renewable energy. That doesn't cover biomass to me. It's not a dig at Andrew or anything, because we have it in our notes. It's there to be sent up. It is a priority for task 3. Leaning.
Excellent. Okay, thanks, Earl. I appreciate that. And I want to make sure folks, and we're just not gonna have time to do it today, so we need to find some time in the coming days. I want folks to read in detail exactly what the council wrote when it took up biomass. It's Liz put Billy put the link to the whole climate action plan. It's in the addendum. It's worth reading in detail, because the council was trying to get at this idea of sort of what happens in the interim while we're waiting for the study to happen, and it's in there, but it's fairly nuanced. So I think it's important for folks to read it and understand how the council is thinking. Billy?
Thanks. I just wanted to clarify, thanks, Judy. I mentioned that I had spoke earlier at one of our previous meetings about prioritizing something and putting it top of the list. And just to clarify, I was talking about the study that has yet to be funded that was in the initial climate action plan addendum. So I was suggesting that our subcommittee could put as one of our top priorities that study be funded and undertaken as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thanks, Jal.
Yeah, so I have a comment on biomass, but I have some other comments as well. Well, so regarding biomass, I really think we should recommend that we not do a study, and that we just, the science is clear. We have to stop burning a lot of things, including wood, and we need to stop cutting our forests down. So I don't really see the point in doing another study. We already lack so much money to put towards the things that we want to do. And like throwing money at another study, I don't think it's really going to accomplish much. So I would suggest that we recommend that a study not be done, and that we just figure out how to move away from biomass power generation in this state. To that point, I know, and I'm still a little unclear about the whole process, but the clean heat standards, I believe that some recommendations from the Climate Council will advise the update to the clean heat standards. And I'm concerned about biofuels as like this bridge fuel, especially from other states. So we're just basically moving the problem over to other states to generate ethanol. So um, I don't know, I'd like to see that somewhere. And then my last comment is there was strategy 22D. The second point was to develop and implement a farmer retirement program to facilitate the transfer of intact farmland. And, you know, we're seeing a lot with farmers. The only income they have is, or the only money they have is their property, and that they're selling that property for a lot of money. Makes it impossible for new farmers to take over that land. And I know NOFA was working on some sort of like farmer pension program, but some way to keep farmland in farming and allow for farmers to retire and have some sort of retirement. So I would like to see that added back in as a recommendation.
As like one of the priority ones. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know if it has to be that exact wording, but something that is going to help us keep our farmland and our wood lots, being passed on to the next generation and not just sold for $1 million and, taken out of production.
Okay.
Or developed, more to keep it from development.
Right. Yep. That's great. Judy, put your hand up, and I want to grab Jake too. Judy.
Yeah, I think that the screen that was just shown needs to be discussed by our committee again, because Andrew was put in a position of like synthesizing everything in a minute, and that wasn't fair to him, because we have been a team all along, and it's been working that way as a team. So I don't think that that should be taken as how the committee feels, because there's things missing and things were condensed so much they're not reflecting what we had said.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that that was just a summary to get something on one slide, but I completely agree. It's the spreadsheet that we submitted reflects the consensus of us. The summary slide is the first time they'd ever seen it. So
Right. And I didn't even recognize it as stuff we had talked about. So I think we need to take another look at summarizing that because we had 85, something like that, recommendations to consider and to condense into 5, which was difficult task. And then even more difficult was asking Andrew to condense it.
Yeah, and I want to thank Andrew for all of his hard work and working with Judy and myself. I think he's done a wonderful job, and I'm really happy with the recommendations that we've put out there.
I am too, but I want to see them reflected in the summary.
Great. Okay. Jake, and then there's a few things we need to do before we finish up at noon.
This relates to the solar siting or renewable siting, but more specifically solar. And this is I think a question for the committee to consider is, do we want to introduce stronger language about restricting solar development on prime agricultural soils? So just currently there's nothing that wholly prevents that from happening. And I just think that trying to protect our best soils is generally a good policy, and it is an area where I think we see some conflict between our renewable energy goals and our really our resilient climate resilience and food security goals. And so, yeah, I feel like there's an opportunity here to convey stronger language about the need to really protect those soils in particular. So just, yeah, thinking about how we might be able to include some stronger language around that. And also I'm saying that with appreciation for what Andrew and the others developed and shared in full, not on the summary slide, but what was submitted. I think that's what's there is great, and I'm just curious as to how we might be able to add some additional language to it.
Thanks, Jake. So the three things I've noted for this task group 3, I've been taking some notes here, and I haven't always shared them back, but these are just my notes that I'm taking along. And for task group 3, what I've heard in terms of updates, in addition to that full task group coming back and assuring that the synthesis is working for them, but pulling out biomass as a separate action, there is a difference of opinion potentially in this group about whether that action is about funding and undertaking a study versus some other action about moving away from biomass generation in the state, not needing additional study. And so that's a thing to sort out that we don't have time to sort out today, but we do need to sort out.
No, there's no difference of opinion on that, David. We all agreed it should have been a priority to stop it. We didn't find out about the study not being dropped until last night.
Okay.
So now we have further discussion that has to happen.
Okay. Okay. These are the three things I've heard, and we're not sure exactly how the full subcommittee feels about this. And that's why we don't have time to figure that out right now today. But it's clearly something that you want to pull out and do separately as a priority action for yourselves. There's two other things here. One was about some way to keep in things that are lift up as a priority action, support for farms to keep farmland from being sold and get that back in the priority list. And then what we just heard about stronger language in the renewable energy piece about protecting prime agricultural soils. Right. So these are things that came up as adjustments that folks would definitely want to see. We're about to run out of time. Earl and Jael, super quick, if you want to just help me get this better reflected on the page. Earl?
Well, I would put after fund and undertake study as soon as possible rather than or recommend moving away from biomass. My suggestion that I offered was a moratorium if a study is the way to go, because that could take years.
Right.
Studies work. In the meantime, we'll have 8 more biomass plants that are being now in the works for around the state. If the Linden one gets permitted, they've said they want to build 8 more. Why?
Okay.
That's why I would call for the moratorium during the study period.
Yeah.
Just stop right now and let us study this. Thank you.
Great. That's really helpful. And we're going to need a little more time to talk about that than what we have right now. Jael?
Yeah, just real quick. I think we should look at how we could expand the UVA program a little to include folks who have smaller parcels of forest. I don't know, reevaluating UVA a little bit. And then process suggestion. I mean, I think this was a great today was really good. I just feel like we need basically a meeting for each task group to really delve in. Like 3 more meetings. I know it's probably not possible, but that's kind of what I'd recommend.
Okay. Judy, we're pushing up against the clock, and I'll make sure we finish now, and we have a plan for the next pieces. So anything real quick to make sure we get the notes right?
Yeah, I just want to remind you, the first thing I said was that I wanted to discuss this, and you said when it was our turn, we would discuss it. So are you going to put it on an agenda for a future meeting, or are you going to drop it?
What? This?
Biomass.
Oh, yeah. It has got to be, it is clearly the thing in which you need the most time. to talk about. So it has to have its own time.
Thank you.
David, just real quickly, that second bullet, if there can be a reference to forest landowners as well, I think that intergenerational transfer issue is just as ripe there. And then, I'm open to having a conversation about further expansion of the UVA program, but that is a very complicated topic, so that's not something I'm willing to support without a lot more dialogue.
Got it. Okay. Okay. So we
Can
want
I
to
just
do.
ask for clarification?
Yeah.
So we're gonna take the 85 recommendations we have. We're gonna take the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 new ones we just got. What is that, 91, and reduce them to 5?
Nope. The idea is to submit everything. And as part of submitting everything, you're lifting up amongst a whole subcommittee about 15. And that means more or less 5 per subcommittee task group, but it doesn't have to be precisely that. And everything gets submitted. It's just how do you call attention to certain things? And that's what this prioritization exercise is about, is not getting rid of everything. Everything goes in, and you're calling attention to 5 things. And that's what we've been working on today. So I want a quick pause for public comment because we had that in the agenda for this. We need to make a plan for next week. And I think what we can do is a fast turnaround today with a few options. If everyone could, by the end of the day, look at those options and say where they're most available, that would be great. We can combine that with sending out all these materials so everybody can read everything and have the next 5 days or so to go through everything. And then we'll find some time next week and we'll prioritize that time around the things that clearly are sticking points, like biomass or some other stuff, to get it right. That's what I hope we can do. And so we won't be able to right now in real time on this call name the times we're going to meet next week. But we will find some times, and if folks can just quickly respond to emails about their availability, we'll be able to find the time that most meets people's needs. If you're not available at that time, we can have a quick pre-call to make sure that the core things you want to share there will get shared. And your co-chairs or I will make sure that stuff gets shared. Let's do a quick pause for public comment. And I will ask if this is substantive comment on, say, like biomass and things like that, that we maybe hold it for the next conversation, just in the interest of time. But I'll say, let's do a third round of public comment right now. And then we'll wrap up the meeting. Annette?
Yes, my comment is specific to strengthening the language around renewable energy siting. Mass Audubon, Harvard Forest did a report that's, I think I might have shared with you before, something about protecting nature, siting solar. It's an excellent report. The bottom line is that this is about money. So I suggest that you revise that recommendation to something that will be effective. And that is to say, increase incentives for siting solar projects on the built landscape and decrease incentives for siting solar projects, and you can include wind too, on forests and agricultural soils. That's the bottom line conclusion of that very extensive Mass Audubon Harvard Forest report. Create good incentive, give them more money to put them on parking lots and less money to cut forests and put them on ag soils. I think that needs to be your recommendation, simply, and forget this avoid stuff. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Annette. That's really helpful. I appreciate that comment. Cheryl?
Yeah, that's funny because that was quite similar to my comment, and I just want to point it. So I'll just second that, right? And let me tell you that, for example, in Amherst, Mass, there's a parking at UMass Amherst. There's a parking lot covered with solar. It does double duty in shading cars, and in France, there's a requirement that all parking of 80 cars or more must always be covered with solar generation. So it's along the same lines as exactly what Annette said, and with those examples. Thanks.
Thanks, Cheryl. That's great. Okay. So for next steps, indeed, there is a call on the books for tomorrow, Friday. And we've heard some concern that folks actually aren't available for that. And so Billy and Jael, I'm just curious, as we finish up right now, it sounds like the next move would be to put out a couple options for times next week, maybe ditch the Friday meeting. If task groups want to meet tomorrow, and settle in on some language, that would be great. But Billy and Jael, does that sound good that we could, towards the end of the day today, put out an email that puts out a couple options? We can either do a doodle poll or some sort of efficient way for people to signal their availability. And then we'll lock that in tomorrow and have a couple times next week for us to meet. And we can specifically name the kinds of things based on today's conversation we think require the most attention in that meeting. Billy, Jael, does that sound okay?
It does. I don't know if we want to just try to lock some times in now, if folks are willing, but defer to you on that as our master facilitator.
I feel it's very challenging in real time to do that with everyone's calendars. I would just encourage everybody to open their email this afternoon when they get that and immediately reply to that that Zoom or the like a doodle or whatever we send would be my preference. And it's much easier to do that than try to do it in real time like this.
Okay.
Would be my recommendation.
Are we sure we don't have a quorum for tomorrow?
We're not sure. That's the problem. We're not sure one way or the other. We just threw it on people's calendars, and I know Billy can't make most of it, and it's challenging.
Oh, I thought Billy could be there. Okay, that's fine.
Okay. Yeah. So we'll take that off your calendars, and we'll be putting more on your calendar next week. I really appreciate everybody. Clearly we're in a time thing that's very uncomfortable for folks. And I appreciate everybody being willing, even in that time frame, to provide extremely thoughtful and valuable reflections. I know one of the things we're going to get towards is I was in real time taking notes like this of like, these are the things that are being mentioned. And oh, by the way, we've got technical assistance in 4 different ways. Like we could probably consolidate that down into, 2 or 3 kinds of technical assistance bullets, right? And make that nicer. We've got protecting farm and forest lands from development in different kinds of ways, right? And these might be very different, and so they need to be different, or they could be combined in thoughtful ways, right? And so these are the kinds of, when you start to look across the task groups, you could find some very thoughtful ways to hammer home the points that are most important. So I think this exercise is helpful, and going into the next meeting, we can do this kind of thing where we're looking across and we're consolidating and really naming the key things that we want to call people's attention to. The final thing is, in an email later today, we'll send out all the most recent documents, and we encourage folks, as your sort of weekend reading or whenever you have time, to go through all of them. And we'll ask, hey, is there something inside here that's maybe not rising up to our priority 15, but something inside that you really need to have a conversation about because you're uncomfortable with it or you don't understand it or something's in there. And we'll make some time for that. All right. I think that's it for today. Thanks, everyone. And expect some email traffic from Billy and Jael and or Evan or me, somebody later today. And thanks for answering your availability right away. And so we can schedule things up where we have the maximum chance of having a quorum, as many people as possible. Great. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your days. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.